How the others must see the faker. I'm much too fast to take that test. Change it. Turn and face the strange. Change it.
It was once said that not every change is an improvement, but every improvement is a change. Does that make sense to you? No? Well, how about this one? What would our chairs look like if our knees bent in the opposite direction? Okay, that makes the first saying a lot more sensical, doesn't it? Well, in this nugget, we're going to spend some time looking at a very important topic, one that's tightly coupled to configuration management and release management, and it's known as change management. So without any further delay, let's check this out. In this nugget from the ITIL series on change management, we're going to look at 4 topics. First of all, we'll explore change management in a nutshell. Then, we'll look at some key terminology of change management. This is all part of the service transition area of the ITIL. As a matter of fact, if you were going to go through one of the ITIL books, you would find most of this information in the service transition book. We'll also look at change management actions, and then finally, the role of the change manager. Let's look at change management in a nutshell and look back, if you will, to the CBT nugget for ITIL we did earlier on incident management. And think about the examples I gave you of incidents. You can use your own real-world experience. And when you do this, you realize that most incidents will be directly related to change. In other words, when it comes down to change management in your organization, many of the incidents that reach the service desk are because of some type of change or modification to the environment. I mean, think about the process for troubleshooting an end user. One of the first things you're going to do when you're troubleshooting for somebody is you're going to ask them, what is the last thing you did to make a change? Well, say, for example, to their workstation. They've called you up, they've got a problem, maybe something's crashing, some program won't open, some program's not functioning properly. The first question you're going to ask them is, what is the last change you made to your system? Did you install any application? Did you make any configuration change to your application? Did you open up an attachment in your email? Did you click on a hypertext link in your email that took you to a website? Do you know which websites you've been to? Can you look at your history? Have you brought any data into your machine from a floppy disk or a CD? Questions like that. Did you make a configuration change to the operating system itself? That's always at the top of the list. Then, of course, you ask the end user if they can duplicate the last action they took, the last change or modification they took to their system or their application. And there's a bunch of different causes for these incidents. We could have basically just a simple lack of resources. We could have insufficient preparation, a poor job of doing analysis or impact analysis on a change or modification to our environment. You didn't do enough testing. The pilot testing was inadequate. Maybe it's just simply carelessness on the part of users or on the part of administrators. Or it could just simply be the growing pains of introducing a new software or hardware solution. If you don't bring these incidents that are caused by changes into a manageable state, your organization will quickly spiral out of control. In other words, a whole lot more firefighting, a lot less fire prevention. Change management is kind of like a thermostat. And if we think about a thermostat, and this relates also to security. I mean, a lot of the security solutions that companies are going to implement are based on what is their ability, what's their acceptable risk. Is it a company that's adverse to risk, or is it a company that will allow a certain amount of risk and just let insurance or fate dictate? Same thing here with change management. Is your organization going to be a more static environment, or is it going to be a more flexible environment? For example, let's say you're putting into place an IP addressing solution where each one of your network nodes gets an IP address. If you're going to use a static or a stable solution, you'll manually assign an IP address to each one of those devices, tie it to the device, and store it in a database. If you're going to have a more flexible solution, maybe you'll use a DHCP server or servers to dynamically dole out the IP addresses and the configuration information. So is your organization, is it a more flexible organization? Is it more dynamic? Is it a more changing organism, or is it a more stable organization? So obviously the goal of change management is to manage the change process. And this can be any change or modification that's made for a wide variety of reasons. Changes to the IP addressing scheme, rolling out a new hardware solution, going from a Windows server environment to a Linux server environment, or upgrading from a Windows 2000 to a Windows 2003 or Windows 2003 to Vista solution. Replacing, upgrading, and in this process of making changes, we want to limit the introduction of errors and incidences related to these changes. In a nutshell, changes can be caused by four general categories of activities. Changes can be due to innovation. Okay, let's say you're going to introduce a new 802.11n wireless environment to replace your older .11b wireless environment. So because of new technology and innovation, you're going to make changes. Maybe you're going to make changes because of improvement. You found a better sales lead tracking software solution by a different vendor, a better product, a more stable product, a more user-friendly product for a lower price. That's improvement. You make a change. It could be simple modifications, making modifications to the configurations on your routers, making modifications to your firewall devices, your appliances, modifications to your laptop computers, for example, to add more collaborative features for your end users, or corrective measures. Corrective measures, let's say, like security patches, hot fixes, updates, corrections to configurations. So these are the four main categories or the four types of actions that will generate changes in your organization. Change management is related to incidents because, again, changes to your organization are the biggest cause of incidents. But change management as an IT service is tightly coupled with configuration management, and that makes sense because changes to configurations are a constant thing. Adding new configurations to software and services, to network devices, and also change management is tightly coupled or linked to release management. Okay, as you've got a custom software solution, maybe it's release 6.0. Well, you're going to go to 6.01 and 6.02 till you finally get to release 6.1, and then 6.2 to the minor releases, to the major release 7.0. So release management, as you get new releases of software solutions, new versions of device drivers, for example, this is release management, and it's tightly linked to change management. Here's some key change management terminology that will help you throughout the remainder of this particular Nugget movie and the remainder of this ITIL Nugget series. Now, you don't have to write down what I'm going to tell you here because these are all in your ITIL version 3 glossary. But pay close attention as I define, first of all, change. And again, let me just reiterate that these are all terms that you need to know. They're also from the Service Transition book of the ITIL. And remember, the ITIL Foundation focuses a lot on terminology and definition. When you get to the practitioner and the manager level, you get more into, well, managing and practicing. But a change is any addition, any modification, any removal of any entity that might have an effect on IT services, all the IT services. So that should be the scope of change. All IT services, any configurations, any changes in the processes or techniques, any changes in documentation. A change case, this is what we use to predict what kind of impact a proposed change is going to have on our environment. So a change case would lay out different situations, different scenarios that would lead to determinations or clarification of the scope of the changes that our board is proposing. This is also going to be used in our cost-benefit analysis. How does the change in the environment, what is the cost and what is the benefit? That's part of the decision-making process that's going to be done by a team of people or an advisory board, not just simply one change manager. Now, at the end of this Nugget movie, we're going to talk specifically about the role of the change manager. But almost more important than the change manager himself or herself is the change advisory board, or the CAB. And this is a team of individuals that is basically an advisory board for the change manager as he or she goes through the process of assessing, prioritizing, and scheduling the changes. This board should be represented by all the different areas of the IT service provider, all the different business units, and even third parties like vendors or suppliers or maybe even contractors or consultants. The Change Advisory Board, very important. Change history is basically documentation stored in a database that has information about all the changes made to a configuration item or an entry in the database during the life cycle of that item. This should be a history of all the change records, okay? And we'll look at change record here in a second. A change model is simply a logical, repeatable method for handling particular change categories. So a change model should be a specific predefined set of steps that you follow for changing items in certain categories. For example, operating systems, applications, hardware. You could have very simple change models that don't have to have approval from any type of manager or any type of board. That could be just simply the password reset model. Or they could be very complex models. For example, a major software release. I mentioned change record, and a change record is analogous to a row in a database or a spreadsheet, okay? It's a record that has the details of a particular change item. Each change record should fully document the life cycle of an individual change. And a change record will be generated for every RFC, or request for change, that's received, even if the request for change is rejected by the manager or the change advisory board. The change records will be stored in a CMS, or a configuration management system. And this is why change management is so tightly coupled with configuration management, because it's stored in the configuration management system or database. A change schedule should be a document. It can be a web-based document or a hard printed document that's going to list all the approved changes and the dates for the planned implementation or rollout of that change. A change schedule is often referred to as a forward schedule of change. And finally, change management is the process we're looking at here in this ITIL nugget. It's the overall process and procedures that dictate the controlling of the life cycle of all change items. The primary goal of change management is to allow for beneficial changes with minimal disruption to other IT services. There are several activities or actions that take place during the process of change management. And these are, and we're going to look at these in greater detail one at a time here, but just a quick overview. First of all is the recording process, making sure that all the sources of changes can submit their request for changes, that they're adequately recorded in a database. Then there's acceptance, filtering out the accepted requests for changes and then accepting them to be considered even further. Classifications next, where you sort out the RFCs according to their category and according to their priority. For example, high priority software, medium priority hardware, low priority security, things like that. Next is planning and approval, where you consolidate the changes, plan and approve the development process and implementation scheme. You also want to make sure that the necessary resources are available: time, money, personnel, and of course, involve the Change Advisory Board, CAB, whenever necessary. Next is coordination, coordinating the construction, the pilot testing, and the rollout of the change. And then finally, the evaluation process, where you look back and you determine if the change was successful, did it meet its expected goal, and draw conclusions and learn lessons how you can improve the process. These are the 6 steps. Let's take a look at these one at a time in greater detail. Regardless of whatever open standard you're dealing with, whether it's CISSP or the CISA or many of the others that deal with kind of open standard development processes, they're all going to focus on documentation. Document, document, document. So the first thing we're going to look at here in this process is that all of our requests for change will be logged or recorded into some type of database. Along with that particular entry for that change item or change instance will be a reference number of a known error if it applies. So if the change is related to a known error, we're going to have that referencing there in the database. It may not be, and if it's not, you won't have that number. Also, routine changes or standard changes, for example, like a password update or changing the name of a software package or changing the name of an object, will not generate a request for change, okay? That also includes service requests. So standard service requests are not going to be assessed by change management. Those are dealt with by incident management and the service desk. Now, where do these RFCs come from? Who generates them? Well, problem management. That's one of the key areas that's going to, the key IT service areas that's going to generate requests for change. Problem management, other IT staff members, your coworkers, customers, end users, power users. They may be generated by legislation, maybe HIPAA legislation or Sarbanes-Oxley, also known as Sarbox legislation, and mandates from the government are going to generate requests for change. Maybe from a vendor or a supplier who's making modification or changes or upgrades or updates to their software or their hardware or their device drivers. It could be based on a project. Maybe you've got a project and they could lead to a number of changes. This will also tie into project management, which will coordinate with change management the particular processes, like service level agreements, capacity management, things like that. Now, we're going to record these in a log, and what should the log contain? And again, this will just be an entry in a database. It will contain a unique ID for the request for change, so there should be a unique identifier. You may also have, if applicable, a cross-referenced known error or problem number. That's what we talked about right up here on the first bullet point. A description of the RFC, a reason for the change, any information based on versioning, the current version and the new versioning number or the new versioning identifier, information about the individual submitting the change, maybe a name, a location, a department, a telephone number of that person, a submission date, a date stamp, an estimated time frame for implementing that change, and what resource allocations are projected as necessary to have that change made possible. These are all things that should be recorded according to ITIL standard change management. Once the request for change is recorded and logged, you'll have an initial assessment for acceptance of the RFC. You may also optionally include a re-request function for the RFC. For example, if you initially do not accept the RFC from the individual, giving them an opportunity, a certain time frame to resubmit the RFC to better make their case. And remember, this RFC is relating to a particular CI, okay, a change incident, also referred to as a change instance, change item. It depends on the documentation you see what that CI really represents, but it represents basically an instance or an incident of change. Think of it as an entry in a database. Now, this acceptance is going to lead to one of several things, okay? Number one, it would lead to possibly a status change of an existing CI. So the change incident or the RFC could be related to an existing change incident, okay? Or it could be a complete and overall change in a relationship between two change incidents or two change instances. Or the acceptance of the RFC could lead to an entirely new CI or a new change incident. Or it may simply be just something like a new location or a new owner of the CI, changing just basic information within that record. Also included in the change record, once you've got to the acceptance stage, is further information that's necessary to process this change. And of course, that leads us to the next step, which is what we call classification, a concept you're already familiar with from earlier in this ITIL Nugget series. There are two components to the classification process of change management. One is setting a priority for the RFC, and the second is setting the category for the RFC. Both of these things must be designated for an accepted request for change. For example, you may set priorities like, and again, you'll assign to these priorities some type of number or some type of letter. So you could say, assign the number 1 is a low priority, 2 a normal priority, 3 is a high priority, 4 is a highest or critical priority. So you could break it down into either 4 or 5 categories, really depending upon the size of your organization and the ultimate size of your database. Some sample categories that you would use would be things like the RFC would have a minor impact on the organization, it would have a substantial impact on the organization, or a major impact on the organization. For example, an upgrade to an operating system, or putting in place a firewall intrusion prevention system. Those would be major impacts on your organization. Changing the IP addressing scheme may be a substantial impact, but not a major impact. And applying an upgrade to an application may simply be a minor impact, or a new device driver for your laptops. That would be what we call a minor impact. So you categorize and you prioritize. And these are determined along with the change manager and your change advisory board and other steering committees that are working on these particular processes. The reason why the classification step is so important is because the determinations that you make there are going to lead to the planning and the overall approval of implementing that request for change. The change manager will then use some type of change calendar, or what we call the FSC. This is also from your glossary, the forward schedule of changes. We use that forward schedule of changes to plan. Think about it as, for example, as a project manager using a Gantt chart, for example, setting priorities and tasks. Okay? The FSC will contain the approved change details and the planned dates of implementation. The change manager, along with the change advisory board or steering committees, will approve 3 main aspects of the change: the financial aspect of the change, the technical aspect of the change, and the business aspect or the business impact of the change. The financial approval deals with the cost-benefit analysis and how it fits into the budget. The technical approval deals with the technical impact on the organization, how necessary is the change, okay, and what is the feasibility of implementing the change. For example, the hardware upgrade within the time frame, within the budgetary frames, and within acceptable limits of downtime. The business aspect deals with the impact on the overall business of the organization. How will it affect your customers? How will it affect relationships with vendors? How will it change the overall functionality of the way your business runs? Very important. You also look at planning and approval process as estimating the impact and estimating the resources needed. This is all part of the planning and approval process. If you don't have the resources available in time, in money, in personnel, then you simply cannot put that RFC into action. Other contingencies may have to take place, or you may have to wait till a later time to implement this change. This may actually tie into an overall organizational policy that your company has. Maybe you have actually areas of your security policy or your written corporate policy that talks about how your company deals with change. This could be called a change policy. The next action of change management is coordination. This is where the approved changes go to the individual specialist, the product specialist, the networking specialist, the network administrators, possibly developers and designers, the people who construct and integrate changes in the organization. Now, before we do this, we would like to go ahead and pilot test these changes if necessary. For example, if it's going to be an upgrade from Windows 2000 to Windows Vista, there definitely should be a pilot test in a mirrored environment as closely as possible to your operating environment. This may also involve another IT service known as release management, because release management deals with software versioning, hardware upgrades, releases of operating systems, and other services. And we're going to look at release management later on in this ITIL Nugget series. Now, the coordination process may have three phases. You have for sure two phases, but you may have three phases. The first phase is the build phase. Not all changes will involve a build phase, like a standard change. Maybe you're moving PCs from one area of the company to another, or maybe you're moving your wireless access points to get better coverage. You don't really need a build phase for that, okay? You just want to test it out first and then put it in place. But you will have a build process if you're creating new versions of software, if you're developing a new documentation. Maybe you're going from a Microsoft Office environment to a PDF format. Maybe you're overhauling all of your installation procedures. Maybe new processes of coordination with release management, for example. These things would all have a building process. Then testing. Testing is going to provide a back-out feature. You want a way to, if you are putting this change into place and you're pilot testing it and it's not going to work for you, you want to have a back-out strategy, a way to roll back to the original scenario. You don't want to ravage your entire organization with a change that's not going to work in the long run. So a testing phase. You also want to include testing for your technical support areas and your service desk, all these things before you advertise those solutions. And then finally, the final phase of coordination is implementation. Okay, making sure that every relevant area, every relevant business unit that's responsible for this change of the IT infrastructure is participating to the best of their ability. Making sure that the change is on schedule, clear communication plans between all the parties involved, between the end users, between the service desk, between systems admins, network managers, network engineers. All these people must be involved. That's the coordination phase, or the coordination action of change management. We would call this phase the coordination phase. We would call it the implementation phase. But the reason why we don't is because you have two other phases that are so crucial, building and testing before you implement. So it's really coordination between all of the parties that are involved with the building, with the pilot testing, and the eventual rollout. So coordination is a much better name for this action than simply implementation. The final action is actually one that's often overlooked, and that's the evaluation action. And so many people, if you're like me and you like to get yourself involved in projects around the home, or maybe you like to get projects going at your company to accomplish certain things and get better productivity or bring something to the bottom line. You know, we have that excitement and that drive to see a project through till its completion. And once that project is put in place or implemented, we're ready to move on to the next thing. It's kind of, I don't know if it's a guy thing where we have to just, conquer. And once we conquer something, we're ready to move on to the next village that we can go in and conquer and pillage. But the bottom line is evaluation is extremely important. And this evaluation action, all implemented non-standard changes should be assessed. We don't need to focus, again, under change management, we don't need to allocate resources to evaluating the standard changes or just simple service requests, okay? We're talking about full-blown RFCs here. And what are the things we're going to ask ourselves as we evaluate this process and this particular change that we put in place? For example, moving a bunch of workstations from one area to another. Okay, did that change meet our intended goal? Are all the parties involved in this migration of machines from one area to another, are they all satisfied with the results? Were there any unplanned side effects of this change? Did it negatively impact any other areas? Did our implementation that we put in place, did it exceed the estimated costs? or did it cause unnecessary or lengthy downtime that wasn't anticipated, okay? Now, once we get this evaluation process through, we close the RFC. It's successful, we've evaluated it, we close the RFC, and then the results will be documented or logged in the post-implementation review. This is another key term of ITIL. That post-implementation review should always be done after you've closed a request for change. The great philosopher Ovid once said, "All things change, nothing is extinguished. There is nothing in the whole world which is permanent. Everything flows onward. All things are brought into being with a changing nature. The ages themselves glide by in constant movement." And the person in the organization who should understand this concept more than any other is the change manager. Now realize your change manager may also be the same person as your problem manager. As I mentioned earlier, it's quite likely, based on the size of your organization, that the problem manager and the change manager would be the same person. However, we want to separate the change manager and or the problem manager from the incident manager because, again, their goals can seem contradictory. What is the role of our change manager? And by the way, this is just one individual that may be part of a bigger team, of a bigger steering committee. Your change management team may be made up of change managers and product managers, middle managers, liaisons to upper management that are part of the change authority. Maybe you've got a release manager. Maybe you've got an executive committee instead of a change advisory board. But regardless of the names, you still got a key leader of this process who has overall responsibility for change management and a lead role in consulting with management liaison and that change advisory board or an executive committee. Now, it may be a single individual or it may be the leader of a steering committee. Either way, there really needs to be the buck stops here individual. The man or woman who's in charge of reaching all of the change management goals and developing a method of ensuring effectiveness and efficiency. Somebody with at least an ITIL foundations, preferably a practitioner or a manager of the ITIL. This person is going to define the scope of change management for your organization, for your business, and all the associated processes. They'll be able to delineate the actual change management process from incident management and release management and problem management, and to be able to compartmentalize and modularize these functions and these services. They're going to receive logs, okay? They may be the ones prioritizing and categorizing the RFCs. They'll be the person to convene the change advisory board to review especially critical RFCs. And they'll be the ones to submit CAB recommendations to possibly stakeholders, maybe a CIO or other liaison to upper management. So the change manager is an extremely important person. And you know what? His or her title may not even be change manager. It may be a product manager or a project manager or maybe a vice president. Regardless, the role is still the same. In this very important ITIL nugget on change management, we covered 4 key knowledge areas. First of all, we looked at change management in a nutshell. Then, some key terminology on change management. We looked at the change management actions: recording, acceptance, classification, planning and approval, coordination, and evaluation. And then finally, the change manager role. I hope this CB's Nugget has been informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing. We'll see you in the next movie. Take it easy.
How the others must see the faker. I'm much too fast to take that test. Change it, learn and face the strain. Change